Transportation Planner Manager, who will give a presentation.
Good afternoon. Dan, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Thank you. So as Dan mentioned, we are here for the FY25 application intake webinar for GAP, which is Growth and Accessibility Planning. The agenda for today's webinar includes some information about the GAP TA itself, some additional resources for those who are on the call or those who you might want to share this with. We will share some information about the program components, the roles and responsibilities, not only during the application phase, but in the subsequent phases as well. And finally, points of contacts and any questions that you may have. So as we start, I would like to share that there is a program guidance available as well. And that program guidance includes a lot more information than what we will be able to go through in today's webinar. So please make sure to utilize that. There's also a second webinar that is currently scheduled for October 2nd. That webinar will include the same material and the same presentation, but the question and answers may vary depending on the audience and the attendees. So let's start with some information about the GAP, recognizing that many on this webinar may already have applied in the past or are familiar, but this is to ensure that everyone is on the same page about the program and some its background associated with it. So our office, the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, is located within the Secretary of Transportation's office. We work very closely with VDOT and DRPT, our sister agencies, but it is a separate office within the Secretary of Transportation. It was created in 2002, so we have been around for nearly 2 decades. Many of you have already met with or applied for smart scale funding programs. Margie Ray, who conducts quarterly meetings with MPOs and PDCs, and then Chad Tucker, who is leading the project pipeline programs. So all those 4 programs are those programs in VTrans and GAP reside within the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. For nearly a decade, OIPI has offered technical assistance for planning within urban development areas, and I will share a bit more, more information on that later in the presentation. But since 2020, we have expanded the technical assistance program to include some other items that were previously not covered. So the 3 items that were added were focusing on the other some feedback that we heard from applicants and then the planning community. So the first one that was added in 2020, and it continues to remain available in FY 2025 as well, is planning for emerging areas such as shared mobility. And again, we will share more information on that later. Process development. So if someone is trying to develop a process that they can repeat year after year. And then planning within growth areas that are not designated UDAs or urban development areas in non-urban areas. So in other words, a locality that is in a rural part of the state wants to focus on items that are related to traditional neighborhood design, but does not want to go through the designation process. So as I mentioned, this program has been around since fiscal year 2020 and 2021. So we have allocated approximately 2.5 million over the last 3 years. We did not have an application intake cycle in last year. But as you can see, generally we have approximately somewhere between 500 and 600,000 available for these planning assistant awards. The GAP program focuses on advancing the vision of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. It focuses on activities that are listed in our office responsibilities that are listed in the Virginia Code section 2.2.22.9. So one of those responsibilities for our office includes providing technical assistance. So this program, along with many others, are part of that larger effort. The third program goal is to ensure that the localities are prepared for some of the long-term trends that have been identified according to the CTP's policies. And finally, support the intent of Virginia Code section 15.2, 22, 23.1, which is the designation of urban development areas. And again, I will share more information on that later. As we start sharing information on GAP-TA, I would like to clarify a few items as well, that GAP-TA program is not intended to duplicate other available assistance opportunities, such as OIPI's project pipeline that my colleague Chad Tucker leads, or VDOT's STARS, arterial preservation, and many other programs. GAP-TA program also cannot provide assistance with activities such as traffic or roadway design, operations, transit facility design and operations, sewer and stormwater design, simply because our focus is on sketch planning level activities. Applications submitted for GAP-TA program are reviewed, and if we find that this application does not seem to fit what the GAP-TA program intends to do or wants to do or is able to do in a particular cycle, we make sure to make others within VDOT and DRPT aware of it if needed. But I would like to clarify that at no point the GAP-TA application replaces the applications for any other funding program. So please continue to apply for any other funding programs that you intend to. So I would also like to clarify what we mean by technical assistance. So in this instance, we are focusing on consultant support to conduct planning activities identified by localities and other eligible jurisdictions. This technical assistance is not a grant. In other words, we do not provide direct financial assistance or reimbursement for any expenses that might be in the scope or outside the scope or are related to the conduct of it, such as your staff time. OIPI has a consulting team available for this contract and for the GAP-TA program. And we select consulting from that consulting team based on availability and qualifications. We also want to make sure that there is some consistency between work that is performed in one part of the state with that being performed in another part of the state as well. Before we get into the details, I would like to share, and as Dan mentioned, that this presentation is currently available on the VTrans website, which is vtrans.virginia.gov. And a recording will also be posted later. The GAP-TA webpage also includes several other pieces of information that you may find useful in addition to what we are sharing today. Now, as I mentioned, this program has been around for a few years. In the FY25, there are some minor revisions and minor modifications. The two noteworthy items that I would like to share with those who have been involved in this program or have applied before. The first one is that there are 4 components. So of those, in all components, we are now going to consider history of technical assistance provided by OIPI as one of the evaluation criteria. As I mentioned previously, our office used to provide assistance for urban development area related planning as well. So we did not have the history, and therefore that criteria was not there for other planning activities that were incorporated. But now we have sufficient backlog and sufficient awareness of the work history and the award history provided via this program. So we will be considering that moving forward as part of the evaluation process. Second, for cost estimates, we would like to continue using pre-quantity tool or PKT or any other tool that is available, latest tool that is equivalent latest tool that is available and has been provided by VDOT's cost estimation office. This is it's not something that is impacting the application or what an applicant has to do. It is something for more for consultant to incorporate as part of their scope. So with that said, and the resources in mind, we would like to go over the program components, some eligible activities, and eligible entities. So as I mentioned, there are four components or four aspects of this program. The first one, which has been around for nearly a decade, which is to conduct multimodal planning within existing or planned urban development areas or growth areas. Again, this has been there for nearly a decade. What was added in 2020 and later years was the other three parts that you see. So the second part that was added was to evaluate strategies for long-term emerging planning related issues. An example is real-time curbside management, a study that was conducted by the town of Leesburg. Or it may include, for example, shared mobility or planning for scooters, dockless or otherwise, and shared bicycle, designated parking areas or other considerations for shared mobility. The second component, which was added in 2020, it was to develop an accessibility planning process. In other words, developing a process that can be repetitive, that can be repeated, and thereby saving resources over a longer period of time. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, which is conduct planning outside urbanized areas, in rural areas, small towns, where there may not be substantial growth, but there is enough need to conduct planning to support the populations that currently reside and conduct business. So with that, we will go over each component in more detail. So first component, again, is the planning within urban development areas. So the Code of Virginia 15.2, 22, 23.1, it's a code section that resides under the comprehensive plan section of the Code of Virginia, allows for localities to designate growth areas. These growth areas in the code are referred to as urban development areas or UDAs, but they can be called something else as well. So this is a voluntary designations that localities choose to adopt to ensure that their resources and infrastructure is focused on a concentrated area to ensure greater efficiency. The eligible entities for this include cities, counties, and towns that are responsible for their development and amendments of their own comprehensive plans and maintain their own infrastructure. So in other words, not every town is eligible for this particular component. The maximum duration that we allow is up to 12 months, but I will note that most of the times we would like to complete the work performed for these type of grants under 6 months. In fact, we have done these in 3 to 4 months, as recently as 2022. Eligible activities include pedestrian-friendly roadway design, connectivity, analysis, mixed-use development. So for example, infrastructure that might be required to support mixed use or mixed housing types, Analysis of land use or the zoning codes is also permissible. In this and this language, the one that is shown on this particular slide comes directly from the code. The noteworthy items for this particular component, if you're considering, is that if you are considering designating a growth area but have hesitations on calling it an urban development area, you can utilize other terms that are shown on the slide, such as strategic growth area, designated growth area, transit supportive area, or mixed-use residential area. And these are the terms that many localities have utilized in their comprehensive plans. One of the questions that we get is, does urban development area mean that every growth area has to have densities that are the densities equivalent of Tysons? The answer is no. These are essentially context-sensitive designs. At least that is our understanding of the code. So there is a greater flexibility assigned to localities to appropriately identify and then allocate densities and land uses within these growth areas. There are growth areas that are all commercial. There are some that are all residential, and there are several others that are mixed in nature as well. I will also point out that there are some growth areas that have relatively low density that is pretty standard otherwise. And there are others, such as Tysons, that have very high density, some of the highest in the state as well. So there is a wide variety to pick from, and that discretion is with the locality and will remain with the locality. If you have any questions related to how to designate these urban development areas or how to go about doing them, there is a fact sheet that is included on the slide. You can get more information. We will not be going into details of how to designate a growth area, but if there is a desire to have a growth area, or there is already a growth area and there is a need for planning to be better prepared for what is on the horizon, this would be an appropriate avenue for you to conduct that and apply. The expected outcomes of this include the planning for multimodal infrastructure. We have had a jurisdiction that started planning for a mall that has seen its peak, and they wanted to identify opportunities for redevelopment, wanted to look at how to complete the street grid, to ensure that developers have a better sense of what and where to propose. Many localities have utilized this component to identify sidewalk gaps, bicycle gaps, multimodal connectivity issues. So these are some of the examples that are listed here, but there is a wide variety that you can apply for. And some of the examples you can find based on the work that has been completed to date by looking at the GAPTIA webpage. So with that, moving on to component number 2. So as I said again, this is this and the subsequent components was what was added in 2020. So here the goal is to develop and evaluate strategies to address emerging planning issues. The eligible entities include MPO, PDCs, as well as transit operators, cities and counties, towns as well. And here there is more flexibility as far as the schedule or the timeline to complete the work is concerned, simply because to evaluate a strategy, so for example, a municipality has deployed dynamic curbside management. To analyze the impact of it, it might take a bit longer. Or for example, someone may want to do a particular analysis during peak periods, which might be during certain events, or they might be during certain part of the year or during a particular season. So therefore, there is much more flexibility if someone is looking to evaluate impacts of a zoning change or something else that they have adopted related to an emerging planning issue. Whereas to develop a strategy, the timeline is much shorter. It is up to 9 months. So some of the eligible activities, for example, include the land use and transportation impacts of shared mobility, utilizations of new data sets. So for example, utilization of strata and other data sets that are related to non-motorized mobility, but are not widely used yet. Utilization of mobile computing. So there was a proposal to develop an app for one of the jurisdictions for curbside management. In that case, they decided to rely on a vendor and then modify it so that they can utilize it as well. Planning for electrification of the auto fleet is another example. So the goal here is, from our office's perspective, that we would like to have product or something that is scalable or replicable and can benefit other parts or other jurisdictions within the Commonwealth. So while it is great that a product can help the locality and is able to provide immediate benefits to them, our goal would be to see, can it be scaled or replicated elsewhere? In other words, does it have a wider applicability than the particular context utilized for a particular jurisdiction? Component number 3, the third of in total all 4 components, relies on developing a process. So the idea here is that instead of a locality or MPO or PDC relying on a consultant to conduct something year in, year out, it is to allow them to develop a process that reflects their internal capability, thereby allowing them to conduct that work themselves in a, utilizing performance-based planning principles. So MPO, PDCs, cities and counties and towns, select towns are also eligible, and the timeline for this is up to 15 months. I will note that so far we have had MPO and PDCs utilize this avenue quite a bit. We have had one instance where a city decided that they wanted to see how they can coordinate their non-motorized infrastructure development with their repaving schedule. So in other words, they go around and repave streets. Can they do restriping and align the newly designated bicycle facilities with their bicycle plan? In other words, it is an annual cycle that they have to go through, and they developed a process to do just that. I will note that the idea here is not to do one-time planning. In other words, if an MPO wants to do long-range transportation plan, this is not a good avenue for that. And simply because VDOT and DRPT do provide resources for those one-time opportunities, here the idea is to develop a process. So at the end of it, you may not have a plan that you can take to the board, but you will have a process that you can utilize and your staff can utilize every year or every other year. So the eligible activities include development of performance measures, performance-based planning processes. A great example here is some of the work that was done by a PDC in the central south portion of the state. Identification and assignment of roles and responsibilities. So many times an MPO or a PDC has to work with the member jurisdictions to develop a long-term plan or long-range plan or update a long-range plan. So developing or having a common understanding of roles and responsibilities is something that has been done pretty much all the awards that have been granted through this grant. Development of structures and document templates. So we have had an MPO develop, for example, a data structure and document template that standardizes outputs that they have to produce on an annual basis to take to their board. So expected outcomes are something that you can utilize again year in, year out. They may need updates, every 4 or 5 years, and to date we have had great success with this particular component. And the fourth and final component is conducting planning outside urbanized areas. So the feedback that we received was many local jurisdictions that are in the rural parts of the town or state were hesitant to designate growth areas because either they were not witnessing significant growth or they were hesitant to utilize the term urban development area or growth area or anything related to growth. And they wanted to address infrastructure needs, multimodal needs for aging populations and other populations that currently reside to do, and to do that, they needed some planning assistance. So this component was developed just for such localities. These awards have primarily been given to smaller towns and in some instances PDCs that are working with towns, but eligible entities include a wide variety of agencies. And here the maximum duration is up to 9 months, although I will again note that most of the time the work is completed in a pretty compressed time frame of 3 to 4 months, 5 months maximum. The eligible activities are very similar to component 1 that you saw earlier, except that these activities do not require designation of a growth area or an urban development area. And the outcomes are very similar as well, that localities or towns will find sidewalk gaps, will find need for additional crosswalks to support their main streets or to support their residential neighborhoods. So that was a very high level and quick overview of the components. I will note that in the guidance document, you will be able to find a lot more information. You will also be able to see evaluation criteria that are utilized. They vary from component to component in some instances. But with that, given the limited amount of time that we have, we wanted to focus on some of the highlights to make you aware of the resources, go through how the application works as well. So let's do that in the next section of this presentation. So if you are interested or are considering applying for fiscal year 2025, you can utilize the application that is currently available on the web link shown on this slide. This application includes 12 to 18 questions. So for example, if you're a town that you may have a couple of more questions, or if you are applying for a particular type of component, then you may have slightly more questions than others. But it doesn't take more than 15 minutes as long as you have a letter of support and you have a sense of the desired or output or the desired outcome. Preliminary outline, which can be up to 1,000 words, is as the name suggests, is preliminary. So in other words, you do not have to develop a detailed scope of services or a map or shapefile. So for example, if you're planning to study a particular corridor, have a map or a shapefile that you would like to share with us, that would be helpful. An entity or jurisdiction can apply for more than one component. So in other words, there are 4 types of grants that you can, or the awards that you can get, right? And a town may decide that they would like to apply for component 1 because they have a growth area, and at the same time, they want to apply for component 2 as well, which is to evaluate strategies for emerging issues such as electric vehicles. So they can apply for both within one application. So you do not need to create 2 separate applications, although you can if you choose to do so. Also, applications do not have to be completed in one session. You will note you will notice Save and Continue Later button on the top right corner of the application window. Please utilize that, especially if you have to coordinate or gather information from other entities, or you just want to start and see what else you might need before completing the application. Once you submit an application, you will get an email from the email address listed on the slide with a PDF of the completed application. We request that you review that PDF that you receive. We receive it as well. And the reason I say that is sometimes either there was a glitch or something else happened and resulting in incomplete information included in the application, or something that you might have done on one day and you completed the application another day and might have been updated. So we request you review it and get back to us if there are any errors or inconsistencies as soon as you can. So with that, we are approaching the end of the slide deck. I want to leave some time for the Q&A as well. So let's just quickly go over the roles and responsibilities, because this is not a grant. And so the roles and responsibilities are slightly different than what you may have seen with other awards that you have received in the past. So a successful GAP TA application has 4 phases. Application phase, we are under that right now. Award, technical assistance, and closing. And we'll go over each very briefly. So application phase includes, you considering applying for it, gathering support from your local jurisdictions or neighboring jurisdictions, or your board or city council or your city manager. As part of the application process, our responsibility, so the first column is for OIPI, the second column is for consultant, third column is for applicant, and fourth column is for VDOT and DRPT. As part of the application process, we evaluate applications and coordinate with VDOT and DRPT as needed as well. We also, as I mentioned earlier, see if there is an appropriate fit with this funding program, or if it is something that has already been considered for some other assistance in the past, such as STARS or arterial preservation. So in other words, we do coordinate with our sister agencies, VDOT and DRPT. We once we see that there is enough and there is interest, and that a particular application aligns with what we are looking to accomplish with this program, we will get in touch with the applicant and say, let's develop this application into a detailed scope of services and see at the end of it if it still aligns with what we can do. An example would be, and we have had instances in the past where an applicant is interested in doing analysis over the entire city. Well, we do have fiscal constraints, and it may not be possible to analyze the entire city once you have developed a thorough scope in $100,000, which is the max amount that we can allocate for a particular cap component 1 award. So at the end of it, we may realize, well, it's a great project, or it would be a very desired product, but this avenue GAP TA is not something that is suitable for it, and the applicant may choose to do something different, or the applicant may choose to reduce the scope and say, let's do a portion of the city as part of your award. So in other words, there's a lot of back and forth that occurs during that period before we do the award. So during the entire period, we are in the application phase. We also have to coordinate with consultants to make sure that they have the availability and resources to work in a particular part of the Commonwealth, for example. So it's not final until it moves on to the award phase, where we issue notice to proceed. And it would be at that point, we will establish contacts between the applicant, the consultant, VDOT and DRPT, and they all, we all come together and then, start working on it. So the reason I mentioned this is in the past, we have received questions. Can I contact a particular consultant to do the work under this under GAAP TA. And the answer to that would be we request you not to, simply because, first of all, we don't know if the award will be possible or not. Second, we do have our own consulting team. And third, we look for other factors as well. In the technical assistance phase, I would like to highlight two items, realizing that we are still months away from it, that GAAP program focuses on technical aspects. So if you are envisioning public, charrettes or large public outreach effort, or you anticipate requiring multiple presentations to your board, please note that those activities cannot be conducted as part of GAAP. We realize the importance of public and agency outreach, public involvement, but we want to focus on the technical aspects. So those activities will remain with the applicant or as applicant responsibilities. The consultant can provide some support for you all but it will remain under your column. So you will have to ensure that it is something that you all can perform during the given time frame. And second, that there is enough staff resources available. And the closing phase is where we review the final deliverables. I will like to inform that OIPI's role in reviewing deliverables is rather limited. We want to ensure that did we accomplish what we set out to do? Was it based on performance-based planning, solid data, and so on and so forth? VDOT and DRPT, if they are involved, if it is roadway related, VDOT, if it is transit related, DRPT, then they will review it from consistency with their standards, practices, previous decisions, so on and so forth. Before the product can be finalized and released for public consumption or presented to the board. And that's when the technical assistance closes. Noteworthy items, so just two quick slides before we open it up for Q&A, is that please don't let the word application intimidate you. And by that, what I mean is these are very simple expressions of interest. This is not a smart scale applications. This is not applications for a federal grant where you have to spend considerable amount of resources. We request you to take a look at it, and you will find that it is pretty straightforward, very simple. You are not required to develop detailed scope of services. We request you to sort of focus on what you want to achieve at the end of it and how you will get there. So you do not have to list every meeting with the consultant that you need to have, but how you will get there, what the milestones will be. So for example, do you anticipate one meeting for your city council or a county board? Or do you anticipate this purely a technical exercise that will just be for the staff's consumption? So please consider those items, and concise and focused applications are of great value and provide substantial input to us as well. You will notice one of the evaluation criteria is focus of your application itself. Which is focusing on does the applicant have an intended end use in mind? What happens after you complete a planning study and you have a document in your head? Have you already thought of what funding programs you will go after? What is the timeline for those, and things related to that? Again, coordination, if you need, please, think through it at the application stage. And the reason I am emphasizing that is because in the past, we have had a few delays where at the end of it, all of a sudden, there was a change in the city council or something else. And then there was a desire to make presentations to internal stakeholders, leading to a number of changes. So if you anticipate involving other groups within your jurisdiction, I request that you consider that now and list those in the application, because it is harder for us to make such changes after the notice of proceed has been issued. we request that you plan for your staff involvement. Consultant is there to help you accomplish what you're trying to do or have been wanting to do. But it is very important that they get the direction and your leadership to ensure that the end product meets your goals or your jurisdiction's goals. So with that, the timeline, we are at the second step in the timeline. The application intake ends on November 1st. And if there are any questions, please reach out to Dan, Forget, or me. You can utilize our email addresses to send us email. And if you have any questions, we are here to help. With that said, Dan, I will turn it back over to you to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jitender. And as a reminder, if you have any questions that you'd like us to go over now, you can put them in the chat panel at the bottom on the right-hand side of your screen. And we do have one in reference to slide 21. Does the term community planning area work as an alternative term for UDA?
Sure. So I will say that it would work. I will request you to take a look at the fact sheet that is highlighted here, included on the slide. And the reason is that there are really two requirements in the code. The first requirement is that any growth area, whatever you may end up calling it, has to be shown on your future land use map. And the other requirement, if my memory serves correctly, that it is that there has to be a code reference and mention of some densities. Please do not quote me on this and refer to this fact sheet. We are here to help you if you are thinking of designating one, and we can share some sample resolutions or plans that we have received in the past, if they are of any help to you. But feel free to reach out to us. But the term itself is not as critical as the intent behind the code. I hope I answered the question.
All right, so it looks like that is the only question we have right now. And Todd said that you did answer the question.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. If you do have any more questions, feel free to email us, or if you're still writing in the chat now, we'll monitor it a little after this meeting is over as well. I'll follow up with an email later this week that'll have some links and more relevant information about what we discussed today. And that's all. Have a good afternoon.